Beijing is one of the world's largest cities with over 21 million people, but it's seriously lacking in drinking water.
For years, the idea sounded impossible, carving a freshwater trench across 4,300 kilometers of mountains and desert. Yet China forced rivers to shift, slicing through stone, heat, and barren earth to push water where nature never intended it to flow. Piece by piece, a hidden network emerged, reaching regions once written off as lost. Now the silence around this colossal project is broken, and the reason behind it shocks even the experts.
100 cubic meters of water per person per year, it's actually one of the most water-scarce cities on the planet. The groundwater is so depleted, it's actually causing subsidence. In some areas of the city, the earth is actually starting to collapse.
China's water crisis. The lifeblood of northern China simply vanished. For an astonishing 226 days in a row one year, the mighty Yellow River, a symbol of the nation's very civilization, stopped reaching the sea. Its vast riverbed near Shandong transformed into a sun-baked, cracked landscape, a terrifying preview of a future without water. This wasn't an isolated event. It was the most dramatic symptom of a national catastrophe quietly unfolding in the early 2000s. Across the country, the ground and the people living on it were pushed to their limits as an enormous freshwater shortage swept through the early 2000s. More than 400 cities struggled with shrinking supplies, and over 100 cities were placed in the highest danger category. Beijing, a city with millions of people, found itself with barely 66,000 gallons of water available per person each year. To put that in perspective, the international standard for water scarcity is set at 448,000 gallons per person. The reality on the ground was brutal. Families were left measuring out every drop. A home with 4 people would barely have enough for a few large tubs of water stretched across an entire year, and that frightening reality set the tone for what followed. Down in Hebei, villages depended on wells drilled nearly 1,000 feet deep. People often walked out in the middle of the night with metal buckets, hoping the slow trickle underground had filled just enough for another day. Locals spoke about rationing a single ladle from morning until evening, sharing it between families and livestock because there was no choice left. What made the situation even worse was the uneven spread of resources. Almost all of China's freshwater rested in the south, while the north, responsible for most of the nation's wheat, sat dry. Fields hardened under the heat until they could no longer grow anything. Entire stretches of farmland turned into deserts, leaving farmers with nothing to harvest. The crisis hit industries with the same force. Cities like Tianjin and Qingdao were instructed to cut down water use, and factories were ordered to slow output or shut their gates. Some industrial zones fell completely silent as companies waited for authorities to decide how much water could be spared. Supplies kept shrinking, and the consequences grew heavier with each passing month. By this point, the pressure on the government was immense. China faced a choice that would shape its future. Either find a way to bring water from the distant south or allow the economic core of the country to slowly collapse. Leaders understood that doing nothing was no longer an option. What came next would be one of the most ambitious engineering decisions ever attempted, and the path toward that solution reveals the scale of desperation at the time. The idea that started it all. A single idea rose to the surface during a tense moment in the early 1950s, and it would eventually shape the direction of an entire nation. It came from Chairman Mao Zedong during an inspection of the Yellow River in August of 1952. At the time, he remarked that the southern region held more water while the north struggled, and as a result, the two sides should find a way to support each other. His words planted the first seed for a plan that would grow into one of the most ambitious water projects ever designed. What followed was half a century of preparation which pushed China's scientific community into unfamiliar territory. Teams of engineers and researchers traveled across mountains, valleys, and long river systems, trying to map out possible paths for transferring water. Their reports filled shelves, yet every new discovery created a fresh argument. The financial burden alone caused fierce division within government circles, especially when early estimates suggested the project would take generations to complete. Environmental experts and members of the Chinese Academy of Sciences brought forward concerns that could not be ignored. They warned that moving large amounts of water would disrupt ecosystems across multiple provinces. Entire communities would need to be moved from their homes, and water quality could suffer along the way. Their voices added pressure to decisions that were already difficult. As officials studied different options, proposal after proposal fell apart. During the decades that followed, at least 4 major route designs were reviewed in detail then set aside. One early proposal involved sending water across the Tibetan Plateau. But the extreme height of the terrain and the constant risk of earthquakes made the idea nearly impossible. That route remains on hold even today. Even so, the pressure did not ease. Each failed attempt revealed another complication, yet the need for a large-scale solution kept growing. It took until the late 1990s for a stable direction to finally take shape. After countless revisions, China introduced a master plan built around 3 long routes that would eventually work together. These 3 routes were known as the Eastern Route, the Central Route, and the Western Route. The plan signaled a shift from discussion to action, and it marked the beginning of China's direct confrontation with the challenges of nature. Engineers understood that every step forward would test their skill, their patience, and their ability to solve problems no country had ever attempted on this scale. The first corridor opens. A surge of activity began the moment China committed to turning its long-held plan into something real, and the scale of what followed pushed the country into unfamiliar territory. In December 2002, workers and officials gathered to mark the beginning of the Eastern Route, which became the first major phase of the South to North Water Transfer Project. This long corridor stretched from Jiangdu in Jiangsu Province all the way to Tianjin, following the Old Grand Canal for roughly 718 miles. It was designed to move enormous volumes of water each year toward the drier north, especially Shandong and the northern part of Jiangsu, with a smaller portion traveling even farther to Hebei and Tianjin. The hope was simple. Millions across the northern region depended on this supply, and each drop counted. But carrying that much water across such a distance created a chain of challenges that surfaced almost immediately. The lower Yangtze near the Jiangdu pumping station had water that fell into Grade 2 to Grade 3 classification, meaning it could be consumed but only after standard treatment. Other stretches of the route, especially older canals in Shandong and Hebei, showed even worse conditions. Some sections held murky water that carried industrial runoff and waste from decades earlier. To deal with this, China launched a series of upgrades that forced crews to build or rebuild many treatment facilities along the route. Pipes were replaced, new filtration systems were installed, and older equipment was taken apart and rebuilt from the ground up. Each new measure drained more money from the budget, and the cost of keeping the water clean climbed far beyond earlier estimates. Still, the work continued. The construction stretched on for more than 11 years. Engineers spent long months testing pumps. Workers cleared out sections of the canal that had been untouched for ages. Slowly, the route took shape. When the first controlled flow reached the north in the year 2013, it proved that the plan could work on a massive scale. Billions of cubic feet of water were eventually lifted and sent forward, easing the pressure on regions that had endured severe shortages for years. Even with that success, important questions refused to fade. Pollution remained a constant threat, and climate shifts created new uncertainties. Would rising temperatures, erratic rainfall patterns, and industrial demand overwhelm the project in the future? The burden of the Central Route. Not many expected the next phase of construction to push people and machines to their limits, but that's what happened. When the Central Route broke ground in the early 2000s, it was clear from the start that this was the piece that would decide whether the entire South to North Water Transfer project could succeed. The route stretched for nearly 900 miles, carrying water from the Danjiangkou Reservoir toward Beijing. Along the way, it crossed roughly 1,000 bridges and passed through large tunnels carved into unpredictable terrain. Anyone watching the early construction could sense the weight of what was coming, because the challenges began piling up almost immediately. To turn Danjiangkou into a stable water source, the reservoir had to be expanded far beyond its original footprint. That decision set off one of the largest relocations connected to a water project since the construction of the Three Gorges Dam. About 350,000 people were told they would be moved to new settlements. Think of the sheer scale of that. Hundreds of communities saw their villages, lands, and history deliberately flooded, vanishing forever beneath the rising water. Their sacrifice was the first major step. Then came the earth itself, which presented a brutal and unyielding challenge. One of the most difficult tasks involved cutting a 19-mile tunnel through an earthquake-prone zone. Workers had to drill with extreme precision. A mistake the width of a fingernail could have caused sections of the passage to collapse. Even the officials overseeing the project admitted the pressure they were under, especially because the original goal was to have the system running in time to guarantee Beijing's water security during the 2008 Olympics. Pollution concerns and the long resettlement process kept pushing deadlines farther away. The full route finally opened in the final month of 2014. The central route was designed to move about 9.5 billion cubic meters of water each year. A newer project, known as the Yinjiang-Buhan Tunnel, is expected to raise that figure to around 11.5 billion cubic meters once completed in the early 2030s. In recent years, about 80% of Beijing's urban water has come from Danjiangkou through this channel. The journey across the entire system is slow and steady, taking more than 2 weeks before the water reaches the capital. So, the water now flows, but the fundamental question remains: was the staggering cost, both human and financial, a necessary price for progress? Rising water and new doubts. The western route of the South to North Water Transfer Project has been discussed for years, yet it has never moved past planning. Engineers knew what they were up against the moment the idea was introduced. The terrain involved some of the most unstable mountains in the country, a place where earthquakes strike without warning. Beyond that, the rivers that feed this region also flow toward neighboring countries, which raised concerns about how any diversion would affect those downstream. With those barriers in place, the western section remained a vision rather than a construction site, while the eastern and central routes continued running. Even without the third route, the impact of the operational canals has changed everyday life across northern China. For the first time in roughly half a century, groundwater has started rising again. People who had spent years watching wells drop lower finally noticed the difference. Many households even talked about how their kettles no longer built up thick white layers of limescale. Tea, something many families have a personal connection to, tasted smoother. In parts of Hebei, more than 5 million residents were relieved to leave behind water supplies that had been tainted with salt and fluoride. Rivers that had once been reduced to muddy channels began moving again. More than 50 of them regained steady flow, and Baiyangdian Lake, long known as the Pearl of the North, started to recover its color and wildlife. Businesses benefited just as much. Industries that needed reliable, clean water were able to expand, and with that expansion came hundreds of thousands of new jobs. As factories grew, real estate markets followed. Entire neighborhoods appeared where fields once stood. Large industrial parks rose around those new communities, drawing more workers and investment. China then used its growing experience with filtration systems and large-scale canal construction to build a new export sector. Other nations requested support for similar projects, turning domestic expertise into an international business. With all three major canal corridors stretching more than 2,000 miles combined, the country found itself managing a system of staggering size. That size demanded enormous funding every year to keep the waterways clean, maintain pumping stations, and inspect the aging structures that held everything together. Yet success brought new complications. Downstream regions such as Poyang Lake began showing clear signs of stress. Water levels dropped, exposing soft lake beds that had been underwater for generations. Fish populations shifted, and migratory birds that once filled the skies grew fewer. Government teams were forced to adjust water releases and tighten industrial discharge rules to keep the damage from spreading. Henan faced a very different problem. Residents there recalled how old village wells began running dry as the water table changed. Families who had relied on those wells for decades were pushed to adopt canal water, which workers described as being nearly twice the price. The shift was not optional, and that made the transition even harder for small towns with limited income. Throughout all of this, one truth stayed constant. The project delivered water to hundreds of millions. It kept factories working, fields green, and cities supplied during dry seasons that once caused panic. Even so, a difficult question continues to grow louder with each passing year. With rising temperatures, unpredictable rainfall, and expanding cities, many wonder whether this system can hold up under the weight of the future. Voices against the water transfer. A sharp divide began to form around this project, and the tension has grown louder with each new complaint that surfaces. Criticism followed almost as soon as the construction expanded, and many of those concerns came from people who lived closest to the affected regions. Some villagers explained that officials pushed them into signing relocation papers, leaving families with little choice but to leave their homes. Others felt that their voices barely mattered once the plans moved forward. Along the eastern route in Shandong, the concerns grew even stronger. Back in the year 2013, Radio Free Asia reported that fish farmers on Dongping Lake believed contaminated Yangtze River water entering the lake had started killing their fish. They described the water as cloudy and carrying an unpleasant smell. Losses mounted, and families depending on fish farming feared for their income. Beyond these immediate troubles, many observers argued that the project widened the existing gap between city centers and rural communities. Large cities received priority access to cleaner, managed water, while less developed regions waited for smaller portions of the supply. This created a sense that rural areas were being left behind, even though they were the ones who had surrendered land and livelihoods during the construction phase. Others pointed to a deeper issue. They argued that moving water from one region to another would never solve the root problems. Water pollution had been growing for years, and inefficient use in several industries wasted millions of gallons daily. Critics insisted that ignoring these problems while spending colossal sums on transfer routes could create long-term consequences. The cost alone raised worries, especially for agriculture, where smaller profits made even slight price increases difficult to bear. Some experts noted that the money used for the project could have supported large-scale conservation programs or expanded water reuse systems that would have provided more stable solutions for future generations. As the debate continued to unfold, another side of this massive project began to reveal itself. When weather rewrites the plan. For years, people depended on the South to North Water Transfer Project as a lifeline, yet the climate has started reshaping the very system built to protect millions. Rainfall in the southern region has been slipping downward for decades, falling by almost a fifth. Locals who grew up with long wet seasons now talk about how short the rains feel, how the air settles differently when the clouds pass too quickly. Meanwhile, the northern plains, especially the wide Huanghui High region, have been dealing with longer stretches without a single drop. Studies reaching back to the early 1960s reveal that dry spells there have doubled since the early 1980s. Scientists noticed a pattern where warming across Eurasia slowed the monsoon and allowed heat to rise unchecked. There is another part of this shift that worries specialists even more. Flash droughts have started lasting twice as long as they once did. Events that used to run for roughly 20 to 30 days now linger for about 40 to 60. The frequency has climbed as well, and farmers in North China speak about soil turning coarse within days, crops wilting long before help arrives, and winds sweeping across fields with a sharp dryness that bites at the skin. This pressure reached a peak in 2022 when the Danjiangkou Reservoir dropped to record lows. The lakebed showed patches that had not surfaced in years. Giant pumping stations that once ran smoothly began to struggle as the waterline fell beneath the ideal intake zone. Households in Beijing felt a quiet panic grow as messages spread about reduced supply and possible restrictions. Officials tried to maintain calm, yet their own reports painted a tense scene. Engineers had to constantly shift release schedules and adjust the network. In some cases, nearly a third of the expected volume had to be cut because the source region simply did not hold enough. Researchers looking ahead toward the middle of this century see more complications forming. If the southern dry spells continue, the amount of water that can be safely transferred may drop by 2 to 10%. Evaporation adds another weight to the problem, pulling away nearly a tenth of the flow, while the canals stretch for hundreds of miles under the sun. This creates a cycle where the south is drenched by heavy rains in one season while the north is choked by long droughts in another. As a result, it forces the system to bend in ways it was never meant to handle. All of this sets the stage for a deeper issue that has started to move into public discussion. The rise of water and hope. Even with all the doubts surrounding its purpose, the South to North Water Transfer Project has quietly reshaped northern China in ways that are hard to ignore. For more than 10 years, the project has been in motion, and the results have caught the attention of people far beyond the region. The impact is most obvious in the capital. Beijing once relied so heavily on its shrinking groundwater that the levels kept dropping by nearly 5 feet each year. Old wells that sat dry for years carried a hollow sound whenever people tapped the stone edges. All of that began to change once the new supply arrived. Gradual recovery started to show in the monitoring records, and by the year 2020, officials confirmed that both the amount and the quality of groundwater had risen sharply. Some wells that had been forgotten by entire neighborhoods began filling again, which many residents saw as a sign that the city might be pulling away from a long era of water scarcity. The change spread across other northern provinces as well. In Henan, wide fields that used to split open in the heat no longer showed the same harsh cracks. Farmers explained that their wheat stayed green through the seasons, and many said their yields climbed by more than 1/5. The shift was not just something farmers noticed. The fields looked fuller, the soil held moisture for longer, and irrigation no longer felt like a daily struggle. These improvements connected directly to the steady flow of water coming from the south, which helped push the region away from the edge of drought. The sheer scale of this effort still surprises many observers. Each year, China sends more than 3.2 trillion gallons of water from the Yangtze River toward the dry north, a distance that stretches hundreds of miles. Few nations have attempted anything close to this size, let alone kept it running for more than a decade. And even with this massive movement of water already in place, China has made it clear that the project is far from finished. A new phase is taking shape, and it's one that will push the boundaries of what this system can do. The future of the South to North project. Even with doubters raising concerns at every turn, the scale of what comes next shows how far the project is willing to go. Officials have set their sights on protecting the 2,000-mile lifeline that now links the South to the thirsty North. The plan is bold. They want to send even more water through the system while strengthening the network that controls its flow. One of the first tasks is expanding the capacity of key reservoirs. Danjiangkou, which is one of the most important, reached record lows in the year 2022. Those levels dropped so sharply that millions of people in Beijing began worrying about facing another season with dry taps. With the new phase underway, engineers are studying how to raise storage, reinforce walls, and create more flexible control points that can store larger volumes before the dry months arrive. Alongside these changes, cities across the north are preparing a second wave of projects that turn used water into fresh supply. It mirrors what places like Las Vegas already do, where wastewater is cleaned and sent back to serve entire communities. Several coastal cities are also building desalination plants that take in seawater and remove salt so that people inland can depend on something beyond rainfall and river levels. These efforts create a multi-layered safety net that reduces pressure on groundwater, which was once sinking year after year. The greatest challenge, however, lies in the west. Engineers are studying a route that would pull water from rivers like the Dadu and parts of the Mekong Basin and carry it across the Himalayas toward the north. Some experts compare this idea to the United States lifting water from the Great Lakes and sending it over the Rocky Mountains toward Nevada. The path includes rough ice-covered terrain, steep passes, earthquake zones, and rivers that cross several borders. Every part of the region demands caution, yet survey teams have already started mapping the land, drilling test points, and drafting early-stage designs. The aim is to see whether the land can support tunnels and channels that stretch across one of the most unpredictable mountain ranges on Earth. This brings the project to a deeper question. If the western route succeeds, China would be redirecting a portion of some of Asia's most powerful rivers to support hundreds of millions of people in the north. If it fails, nature will set a barrier that cannot be pushed aside. Engineers have called it a race between human creativity and terrain shaped by millions of years. When people talk about the South to North Water Transfer Project, they often focus on the canals, pumps, and giant reservoirs. Yet it has become much more than engineering. It is an experiment between people and the natural world, one that continues to evolve as the climate grows more unpredictable. It is already the largest water transfer system on the planet, and its reach has allowed millions in northern China to avoid droughts that once mirrored the severity of California's dry years. Cities have countless examples that show how powerful the system can be in daily life. Even so, the project consumes more than $2 billion each year just to keep it running smoothly. On top of that, shifting weather patterns and environmental pressure continue adding strain to the system. Whether humans can keep directing massive flows of water across such distances is a question that grows louder each year, especially as global climate conditions become harsher. For now, the project keeps moving forward, carrying both the hope of stability and the weight of an uncertain future. Do you think the benefits of the project outweigh the risks? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.